Welcome back to In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my co-host and best friend, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing really well. How about yourself?
Man, I'm doing good. I'm shaking the rust off here. Listeners won't know that it's been a minute since you and I have had face to face with each other, but
Right.
we've been grinding on the content in weeks in advance to have all these lovely interviews to release. So I hope you all have been enjoying those. We certainly enjoyed recording them. Recently, we had math professor Tim Chartier on the show to break down analytics. That's our most recent release before recording this. So definitely check it out if you haven't given it a listen yet. Lots of really cool insights on there, even about how analytics are impacting injury tracking, as well as how the modern game has impacted rebounding and the potential counter impact of shooting a lot of threes on rebounding. So lots of cool stuff there. As always, you can subscribe to our YouTube feed if you aren't already, or our podcast feed, or hey, why not both? Go hardcore, support the show. Follow us anywhere on social media. We continue to see tremendous growth on our podcast, and just want to say again, thank you to all of you who are supporting us. We really appreciate that and are glad to see you guys enjoying the conversation and getting involved in it. We've got a lot of playoff stuff to talk about. First round, there are some series that have ended. About half of the series available have ended, and half of them are still ongoing, which is kind of perfect for our purposes for tonight. So I'm excited to dig into this with you. But Justin, first, I got to ask, do you have any opinions on Galveston? Putting
Not
you on
too
the
much.
spot with this one.
I thought that was pretty hilarious, but
Oh my
no
goodness.
opinions have not been there. But I'm sure the people of that fine city are not too happy with Charles Barkley at this point, to say the least.
Well, if you, the fine viewer or listener, have not seen that yet, definitely look up Charles Barkley talking about Galveston. And that takes us to the first two series that I want to talk about in the first round. First one, well, we had two series that wound up being sweeps, 4-0 victories for the teams that won. And let's go right to Galveston and talk about Thunder versus Pelicans. Chuck, of course, saying that, they have a running gag on Inside the NBA that teams are gone fishing once they're eliminated from the playoffs, for those of you who don't know that. And they usually say teams are going to Cancun or somewhere tropical. And the Pelicans perform so poorly, in Charles Barkley's opinion, that they're sent to Galveston, and that's what they deserve. Justin, I think the big thing that you and I said about this series was that there are probably going to be some setbacks, some missteps by the Thunder, even though they are more talented than this Pelicans team, and just generally speaking, more available given the Zion situation and all of that. But there weren't any setbacks. The Thunder rolled, being in this category of teams that swept. How does this impact your perception of the Thunder? And if you want to talk about disappointments with the Pelicans, go ahead and mention that as well.
Yeah, let's go to bad news first. Pelicans, bummer, especially what happened to Zion. Seemed like he was coming to his own. He gets hurt, and it seems like that was a massive, massive blow to New Orleans, especially them getting sweep. And I think Zion's not a rookie anymore. I think you have to come to terms with what are you going to do with him in terms of a cornerstone of this franchise. Looking at the Thunder, I'm impressed. I mean, they did what a top seed should do, and that's sweep. That's really impressive. As I talked with the Kings of Sport podcast, which I was a guest on very recently, I have my reservations about them in the second round, even though I have very little faith in the Clippers and a little bit more faith in the Mavericks. But if the Clippers manage to come back and beat the Mavericks, um, there are two experienced teams, and they have a lot of players with tons of experience. That is a factor in the playoffs. So I think we'll know a little bit more when they're playing a more of established team, whether that's the Clippers or Mavericks, despite their flaws. But otherwise, they're very impressive performance. I like their team continuity. They just seem to have kind of like this little arrogance about them that I normally I don't really like arrogant people, but with teams, I think it's an awesome characteristic to have, especially when you're new to such a high pressure situation. I think it's important to have kind of that chip on your shoulder, that little bit of arrogance in terms of being just a unified front. I like their swagger. So I feel like as an intangible, not something that's an X's and O's type of thing, but if they can carry that into their next series and onto the Western Conference Finals, I think this series will be battle tested. Personally, I know it's kind of a weird thing, but I think if they just sweep whoever they're going to play, I don't think that's going to really do them any kind of a service to them. I think they need a series to go at least 5, 6 games to really get a little bit of adversity, get a little bit of that, just knowing what to do with certain situations. Because most likely they're going to play the Nuggets. I mean, spoiler alert with the next topic, but I just feel when you're more battle tested, you're going to be ready to face more adversity in the Western Conference Finals. So, looking forward to seeing the Thunder face some adversity. And I would say, I know I had them in 6 in this series against New Orleans, but I do think they're going to have some problems with either the Clippers or the Mavericks due to that experience factor.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You could see the Mavericks or the Clippers going kind of like YMCA on them. They don't need the speed. They have that craftiness, that know how. They don't need the youth that the Thunder have, but still being, I believe they are the 4th or 5th youngest team in the league. Very impressive showing for them in this playoff debut with this young core. So shout out to them taking care of business. And you alluded to Timberwolves and Nuggets. Let's talk about the Wolves next. Much more interesting series in spite of it being a sweep. I think the point of interest are the big picture consequences that we saw in the league and how things are shaking up and how people have been reacting to the Suns being swept by the Timberwolves. You and I both thought this series would be more competitive. You and I both ultimately did end up picking the correct team here. But I'll be honest, I had a part of me that was thinking, because of that experience and because of my distrust in Gobert's usefulness at a certain point in the playoffs, and same thing with Karl Anthony Towns, at least what we've seen in the past. And when he's dealt with some adversity, I had some reservations about the Timberwolves being able to close this off with the Suns. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is blossoming right in front of our eyes, and that's the big story here. I did see, and I shared this with you, Justin, that aside from LeBron James, he has the second most clicks on social media this past week of any NBA player. So you have this narrative that's been talked about for a while, but is seeming to be legitimate, that we have an American face of the league emerging in Anthony Edwards. Justin, give me your thoughts on what you saw. And again, the other story is that KD is Anthony Edwards' idol, and he, not only rips that torch from KD's hand, so to speak. So KD didn't even need to pass the torch. Anthony Edwards maybe took it, but he also, gives him the DX suck it sign and basically rips his heart out this series. Give me your
Yeah.
thoughts on how this all played out.
I like Anthony Edwards, but did he really take the torch though? I mean, he beat him in a series, but let's keep it real. I mean, how many scoring titles does Anthony Edwards have? How many championships does he have? I mean, let's slow the roll a little bit on he's the face of the league. Let's see him beat the Nuggets first. Let's consider the other players within, he has followed, in the footsteps of Steph Curry, Jokic. I mean, we can go down the line here. I mean,
I'm right there with you, but in terms of like social media, that's kind
sure,
of more
that's
what I'm talking. And I
valid.
think a lot of
True.
fans care about that more than the accolades,
I
unfortunately. But
that's
I agree
no,
with your
fair,
point there.
fair. That's true, and I think we're going to see him tested against the Nuggets. I have my serious reservations about the Timberwolves, but this is a crucible. As I brought up again, I mentioned the Kings of Sports. Shout out to them, Nate and Chris from LA. Shout out to them for having me on. As I talked to them, I think every NBA team, most of them have to go through some kind of crucible, right? Like you take a look at the Chicago Bulls; they didn't just win the title when Jordan was a rookie. Like You take a look at certain teams, even with LeBron when he got with the Heat, they had to lose. Like there's a lot of teams that you just don't win it when you get everything together. So I think with the Timberwolves, this is going to be kind of their crucible to see if they can take out the Nuggets. I don't think they can. The Nuggets have a lot of deficiencies. We talked about their bench. That's been a ongoing theme, but I just think the way with Jamal Murray, Jokic, I just think overall I'm picking the Nuggets. So, but I do think with the Timberwolves, like you said, with Gobert, there is questions in a high pressure situation. Can he get it done as well as Cat? I mean, there's a lot of questions here. But with Anthony Edwards, I do think in terms of him being a reliable, I guess, clutch player for the Wolves, I do think he's for real. As him being this like face of the league, I have my questions, but we'll see. I think this could be the year of Anthony Edwards if he beats the Nuggets and they go to the NBA Finals. I may be changing my tune. Let's talk about the Suns real quick. So, a few things. One, former guest of the show, Gerald Bourget, he was saying that the New York Knicks are reportedly willing to offer anything to pair Devin Booker with Jalen Brunson. So it just tells me that there's already players want out. This is not working. There's already been huge criticism of Bradley Beal. Another tweet saying that the Suns were swept, really disappointing season. They have about 194 million in committed salary for 2024-2025 for 7 players. We have basically every first and second round pick after 2024 for the Suns are either owed or tied up in swaps. So it's not looking good in terms of the Suns in terms of fixing this team short term. I realize they want to win now, but I just think the chemistry on this team is not right, and I don't think Bradley Beal is back to 100%. So they got a lot of questions to really fix in terms of the future of the Suns. I was very disappointed with their performance. Like you said, Matt, I expected a much more competitive series, and just for them to kind of lay down like that, I think was fairly disappointing to say the least.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a waste of a prime year of KD and maybe one
Yeah.
of the last ones that we'll see. You never know. But KD, all in all, had a high performing year. I think, and one of the themes of things we'll see, putting up stats doesn't necessarily mean that you performed well in the playoffs when we get to this portion of the season. I mean, everyone at the pace of the NBA right now, if you're a top 2 guy on your team, you're probably putting up numbers. That doesn't mean that you're getting things done in crunch time necessarily. And the Suns, clearly in this example, in this series, I mean, the Wolves, I guess I underestimated how much of a factor their size and physicality was going to be in this series. It's been an issue for the Suns all season long, and it was magnified in this series. To your point about their future, they need a point guard. This is something that Coach Vogel asked for, and apparently reports are that he was just flat out told no by the front office in terms of acquiring a competent starting point guard. It's a deep need for them. I don't like the fit of, even though Devin Booker has playmaker abilities, I want him focusing on scoring 30 plus points a game if I'm coaching the Suns. So get someone else in there to spend their energy getting the ball up the court and just distributing, starting that offense. I think is a huge need. I think if Vogel is fired after this first year, it's pretty ridiculous. I don't think that guy forgot how to coach after winning the title in 2020. I think he got a raw deal from the Lakers and could potentially get a raw deal from the Suns. Nothing new in terms of coaches being scapegoats in the NBA. It's something that we see quite often. But I'm with you in terms of how the Suns are gridlocked. I'm concerned about their future as well.
Yeah.
KD and Booker. Now, Ishbia, Matt Ishbia, the owner of the Suns, in credit to him, I think he's been handling the PR tour pretty well on this. He's basically stood pat on this roster, saying, we have the guys. This is going to be tough. We just need to get it done. He said about Devin Booker, this is the face of our franchise for the next 10 plus years. So he He has no intention of moving Devin Booker.
Yeah.
We know that in the player empowerment era, sometimes it doesn't really matter how much you adore your star. If they want out, eventually they're going to find their way out. And even if they have to force the issue, they'll do that. So I don't know. We're seeing a lot of the dust settling around this team being nuked out of the playoffs. So I'm like you, Justin. I'm a little skeptical about the New York news. I have no doubt that New York is interested, but I don't know that the Suns have any intention really of moving, certainly Devin Booker, who you could argue is their most valuable asset.
Yeah, they invested so much time into this team just to jettison it now after one season where you had it mostly. And I realize they have injuries, but they had at least Beal in the playoffs. I just feel it's kind of reckless at this point. And that information I got from the Suns was from Keith Smith of the NBA front office show, friend of the show. So
Awesome. So we'll see how the dust settles here, and maybe we can circle back on Denver and T-Wolves a little bit later on. But let's move into the gentlemen's sweeps of the first round. If you don't know what a gentleman's sweep is, well, it's basically my team is dominating you, but to be a gentleman, we'll go ahead and let you win this one game. So you win in 5 games, 4-1 instead of a 4-0 sweep. Let's start with the Celtics Heat, because I also think there's not a ton to talk about here. The Celtics roll this undermanned Heat squad, and basically, as we discussed, Jimmy Butler gets injured during the play-in tournament, and you could say the Heat probably had a very slim chance in this series anyway. There's basically zero chance once Jimmy Butler sustained those injuries. I think that's the big story of this series. Much like the Heat being able to beat the Giannis Bucks last season once Giannis has his injury. It's basically the injury impacted this. But did you see anything from either of these teams, the Celtics or the Heat, one way or the other? Any impressions about them?
Um, not too really. Like you said, not much to add. It's just brutal with the injuries to the Heat. I really,
Porzingis also, I think,
yeah,
turned
that's
his
a huge.
ankle, which is
That's a
concerning. Yeah,
That's a
sorry.
big one, but yet honestly, I'm not really sweating. I mean, we might touch on it, but them in the next round against Orlando or Cleveland. I get some. I think Barkley or Kenny Smith, one of the two, said that Orlando's really big and that might be a bad matchup for the Celtics. I'm not really worried about that for them. I think they're going to go smoothly into the Eastern Conference Finals, and I think they'll have Porzingis as long as he's healthy for the Eastern Conference Finals. And honestly, I mean, we'll touch on it later. Whatever happens with the Knicks or 76ers or Milwaukee or Indiana Pacers, like, I mean, quite honestly, if things break their way, they can kind of even keep Porzingis on ice till the NBA Finals, like, depending on how things work. I really think the Celtics are the best team in the Eastern Conference by a substantial margin, considering just with Milwaukee with all the injuries they have had as well. So, not too much to add. I think Miami has a lot of soul searching to do. I think what is the bottom line with this team with Butler? He has gotten hurt in certain parts. Tyler Hero, we've been chronicalizing him in terms of the Heat wanting to trade him, and his kind of psyche staying with this team. What happens with Bam Adebayo? I mean, it's just what is the future of the Heat moving forward? So they have a lot of questions to answer in the offseason.
Let me go back to the Celtics. I think it is a good point to say that Orlando will give the Celtics more trouble than Cleveland. And I think that purely has to do with the toughness of the Orlando Magic and that size that you mentioned. I do think that would give them more problems. However, you and I picked Cleveland to win the Cleveland Orlando series, which we'll touch on just briefly later on. So I don't think the Celtics will have to worry about that. I do have questions about the Celtics' toughness when things tighten up in the postseason. I'm still not as convinced as everyone else that they're a threat to whoever makes it out of the Western Conference. Like, I really think Nuggets versus Timberwolves is the best season we will see this postseason. I'm going to say it now. I could be wrong. I honestly hope to be proven wrong if we get Nuggets versus Celtics or something else. You always kind of hope to crescendo to the finals, but
Yeah.
I think T-Wolves Nuggets is going to be the best series of this playoffs. One quick question about the Heat. I saw this story pop up that Jimmy Butler is looking for 2-year extension at the max. Do you do that right now, Justin, if you are Pat Riley?
That's a good question. I think if you want to keep in the conversation of winning, yes. But I think if you want to rebuild, I think you move on from him and see what happens. That's what I love Jimmy Butler, but at this point, if you're going to commit to him, I think you're committing to kind of. I mean, it's weird with the Heat because they have having a track record of proving that the regular season doesn't matter, and they can get their kind of everything together towards the playoffs. But I would say leaning on his health is a tough decision. I don't know.
Well, for me, he played half of the games of this regular season
Yeah,
this year.
yeah,
And of course, was injured, unfortunately, during the playoffs when that's usually Jimmy time. I think you want to keep him because he's a core part of your identity and he's kind of fitting and part of that definition now of Heat culture. But I think you do everything in your power to try to get him at a pay rate under the max. Is he willing to leave and go somewhere else, a much worse situation potentially, to get 2 years at the max? I don't know. I,
yeah.
I kind of feel like it's a loss if the Heat lose him, but it's also a loss if they sign him for a max extension because I don't think he is a max player anymore at this point. And I hope he proves me wrong on that account. And I respect Jimmy Butler. The guy's a hard worker and great at what he does, obviously. Let's move on to the other gentleman's sweep that's probably maybe the most interesting of these first round series, or at least in the argument of it, just because of the big names involved in this series and the legacies that are being expanded here. Denver erases LeBron for the second straight year from the postseason, and the Lakers last year was a sweep. This year, the Lakers get the gentleman's sweep at least, or are on the losing side of the gentleman's sweep. Um, a lot of big picture takeaways from this. I'll give you some of my Denver takeaways, Justin, and then I want to throw it to you for Denver, and you can lead us into any thoughts about the Lakers too. I think if anyone was a doubter about Jokic being deserving of MVP for this season, for being in that argument last year, which I don't think many people are arguing against either of those points,
Yeah.
you definitely have to respect him even more after seeing this series. Um, and I also think Jokic and Murray are clearly the best 1-2 combo in the league right now. If you didn't already believe that last year when they won the title, it was amazing how clutch Jamal Murray was in two of these games, hits, game winners, incredible performance, incredible stat line by Jokic, but also doing all those things that Jokic does. I mean, grabbing all the rebounds that he does, which I still feel like is an undersold part of his game, how controlling he is just by grabbing 15 plus boards a game in these series, which you don't see very often in the modern era. You also have the expansion of Jokic, I think, on a mainstream cultural level with the Minions meme that went around and was so popular. It's one of the first times that I've really seen Jokic blow up to that degree. So brilliant job by the Minions movie and their marketing, and also brilliant job by Jokic. I'm sure his publicist was in on it or whatever, him wearing that scarf to that game, the meme generated with the Lakers being the Minions around him. It was just brilliant all around from an optics standpoint. Give me your takeaways on Denver and their performance handling the Lakers like this, and also lead us into the Lakers and any other thoughts you have.
Yeah, they look like the defending champs. I think the thing that stood out to me is I don't think there should be any labels on Jamal Murray being bubble Jamal Murray. I don't know.
Right.
I think that should be over.
Get
that,
out of
should,
here. Yep.
that should never be mentioned. They look really good. I was really impressed. And, I think the Denver Nuggets, for them being such, a stalwart in the league, this is a power team within the NBA. I still think they're underrated. I still think Aaron Gordon doesn't get enough credit. I think he's been phenomenal on this team. And I'm looking for them to face the Timberwolves. I think they're the best team in the NBA. I'll stand by that now. People are worried about their bench and what's going to happen, this year with them coming off the championship. I just think they're still playing at a max level. And I'm looking forward to see them tested as the Timberwolves. Hopefully, they are tested. Hopefully, it lives up to what you were saying, Matt, in terms of it being one of the better matchups in the whole NBA playoffs. If you don't mind transitioning to the Lakers,
Yeah, let's do it.
and what stood out to me was LeBron's press conference when they're asking him if you're going to stay in LA, and he was rather cryptic. I thought it was weird. I was just like, I don't understand. I thought, to me, that's a very bizarre response. I see on just the playoff sheet. This our rundown sheet here. You had this LeBron throwing a fit, I think, with his team, right? To me, I thought would just not get enough attention. Him trying to jump scare a fan. How did that not get national attention? It's beyond me. He threatened a fan. I don't know. I don't understand.
A female fan.
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand why that wasn't talked about more. People were just like, "Well, he did it, and let's move on." I was like, "He threatened a fan." Like these, I don't understand how. To me, I think that's a fine suspension. I mean, I don't. Am I overreacting here? Am I tripping?
I I agree with you here, Justin. I don't know if a fine or suspension is warranted. Have to look at history on that, but
Sure.
given I mean the league has kind of a rough image with two mega stories this past season, and I hate to bring a downer vibe to this, but the league is facing issues with like domestic violence and things like that. And look, LeBron, family guy, so I'm not throwing any of that noise at him, but this sort of like, flexing on this fan, jumping at her like that. I mean, she jumped in her seat. She
Yeah.
like if you saw the view that was behind her, I mean, she was legit scared. It seemed like most of the dialogue was around, people laughing at her because she gave LeBron the crybaby sign. This is what initiated that. I still just think it would have been a good look for the league to throw a fine on him. I don't think a suspension necessarily, but to send something, a message that, like, hey, that's not okay for you to jump out at a fan like that sitting on the sideline. I mean, that's a much different thing even than LeBron throwing that fan out, which we've seen him do before as
Yeah.
well as like Russell Westbrook. They've pointed fans out and had them thrown out. I don't agree with that happening in a lot of cases anyway. And granted, you don't know what is said and what's going on there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty against that kind of treatment to the fans, and I'm against this treatment to the fans as well. So I am surprised that it didn't
Yeah.
get
Me
more
too.
attention.
Yeah. It's
I'm
kind of
with
fell
you.
on the radar. Yeah. Exactly. And then just his comments about staying in LA. It's weird to me. I really don't know what he seems. It seems like he was really. It seems like he's very frustrated from this season. And from what I heard, he was very frustrated at the trade deadline of the Lakers not being able to do anything. And I think
Mm.
maybe that press conference was kind of him. I don't know. Lashing out's the wrong word, but just blowing off a little bit of steam because you would think it'd just be like, "Hey, I like LA. Assess my options, enjoy the summer, see you later." But it just seemed his response was a little bit more hostile to me.
Or even just say, just I mean, we know you're frustrated. We know you don't want to lose 4 to
Yeah,
1 in the first round. We get that. Like none of the greats want to do that, and LeBron is one of the greats. So just say like you need some time to think things over.
yeah,
Just like
that's true.
buy yourself some time.
Yeah,
It was a weird response, like you said. It was cryptic, and he was kind of smiling when he said it
it was.
too.
It was weird.
It
Yeah,
wasn't like a disappointed, I'm pissed off that we lost kind of thing. It was like this, like, here comes another off-season game. Like I don't know. I think it's bad optics. Um, LeBron's been at this a long time. LeBron's a really smart guy. I don't know why we continue to get things like this too. LeBron also, I think it's worth mentioning, had the comments about when he was down 3-0, said it's just basketball, which famously last year, Russell Westbrook got killed for saying a comment basically along those same lines because It's kind of deflecting. I mean, you have like this comparison I saw brought up where Kobe Bryant down 3-0, I believe against the Mavericks, one of his last seasons in the league. His take was, call me crazy, but I still think we're going to win this. And it's just such a juxtaposition
It is.
compared against LeBron saying it's just basketball. Like, well, just basketball, LeBron has made you a global sensation and has made you or will make you a billionaire. So I, I don't know. I think it's a lot deeper than that. I don't think you can dismiss it like this.
Yeah, he's frustrated.
Disappointing. I just think the Nuggets are the much better team. I said at the beginning of the year, I expect the Lakers to disappoint. I think people were drinking the Kool-Aid of them being hot to finish the season last year, but that took so much effort just to make it into the playoffs. Is a similar thing this year. It took so much effort just to get into the play-in tournament. I mean, we were getting close to the end of the season, and the Lakers were 12th in the Western Conference. I never drank the Kool-Aid on this team this year, especially. And, I hate to say it too, but LeBron is the most clicked on player in social media. So there's definitely, and legacy and all that. Yes, he's going to command the max. Nobody would argue that. But I have a hard time believing a team with LeBron at this stage of his career where, yes, he can get stats, but we saw how different things look in crunch time. Both of these last two postseasons, I just don't think you're getting a title if LeBron is a max player. And it's fine. He's earned the max. I'm not against that. But if LeBron's on your team at the max at this point, and yeah, he's 39, I just don't think you're going to have the space on your team to compete for a title. And I know people don't want to talk about that, and it's controversial anytime you say anything remotely criticizing, but I just think that's where we are with LeBron right now. And he's 39. It's okay. He's great.
Well, I think this season, I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate. He was phenomenal. He might be past his prime, but this is not LeBron. This is not where we're at the point to tell him he should retire. And
no,
I think
that either.
And I understood it, but I'm just saying that I think he needs to swallow his pride. And I think if he wants to win another championship, I think he needs to concede that he needs a lot more help. So that's one thing. And two, I think with Los Angeles, I know that I think I asked this question of one of our guests, I forgot who, but LA is not the town to build through the draft. They want superstars immediately. But I think they have to concede, and I know they're pretty much locked up. It's based on their certain decisions. But once they do have all their draft picks back to normal, I think they need to concede that I think building through the draft is probably the best option in that we are out of the era of these super teams in terms of we're going to get three guys and put them together and win a title. I think we've seen through, what's happening with OKC. You take a look at even in Minnesota to some extent, some other teams, when you even look at Golden State, I mean, when you build through the draft and take your time, I think it proves dividends if you draft correctly. And I think with the Lakers, I think they need to come to grips with just getting some superstars and putting them together. That's only going to have so much shelf life. I think even the Suns are finding that out. So, yeah, I mean, another element to this is Bronny too. I mean, that's another bizarre reason.
Lakers will draft him.
That's just I feel bad. Well, I don't know. I think it's unfortunate about Bronny that this is happening to him, even though I think he's the cause. I think he should stay in college. I don't think he's ready for the pros. I think a lot of the analysts have said that, and I think they are correct
100%
in that regard. And I think him going to the pros, just the insane pressure that he's going to have playing with his father. Like, I just cannot imagine if the Lakers have a bad game. If it's close, he has 5 points, LeBron has 30, they lose by one. What's going to happen. It's just in sports culture. I just think it's a horrible with these. I think them playing with each other, I never saw the benefit of that. I think it's just such a romantic story the media likes to portray. Oh, father and son playing together. But like, what are the consequences going to be to this player here that could have had a promising career, but I think is going to be in serious jeopardy in this scenario? I don't like his chances in the pros.
Well, in all due respect, I think it's super unfair to Bronny because if he's going to be an NBA player at some point, which he's not that talent now.
No.
he's got to carve his own path. I think
He
it's
does.
super unfair to put him, you know, I mean, if he's really into it and he wants to play with his dad on a team, we all think about it like it's an automatic that they want to play together. And it seems like LeBron really wants that. And LeBron, one of the big things I respect about LeBron is he always has put up that family image and things like that. I think that's a really good thing as the face of the league for the long time that he's been that. That's a really big positive on that. But look, if I'm like 19 years old coming out and entering the NBA draft, like coming into my own as a 19-year-old, I don't want to be hanging out on the team bus with my dad. Like, and I love my dad. I have a great relationship with my dad. I don't want that. Like, you need to carve your own path, do your own career. So there's an element there too that I think is not talked about enough. I want to transition to this, and then we got to finish with some rapid fire on the other series that are here. This one is obviously heavy consequence because it's Jokic and LeBron. But one of the big things that we saw too is I believe this is the first time since 2005 that we have failed to have one of LeBron, KD, or Steph Curry advance past the first round. So kind of the end of an era. And as you and I talked and predicted, this would be one of the big storylines of this playoff is this is kind of a changing of the guard. And that has come to fruition. The other thing I want to mention before we talk about these other series, when we look at Heat versus Celtics, and when we look at what could have been with the Lakers having beaten the Thunder 3 games out of their 4 matchups, the play-in tournament screwed over the first round in some ways. And I know people like the play-in tournament and the excitement that brings, and it's not going away. That's whatever. I have different opinions on it. But this is one of those years where the play-in tournament kind of undercut our first round, because I think it would have been a lot more interesting, even if the Thunder still prevail, to have a series that goes 6 games and have the potential for LeBron to meet the Nuggets later on. And then also, of course, the point with Jimmy Butler and the injury for the Miami Celtics series. Now, that's just some bad luck. That could have happened in a last game of the season situation. So I think that's a little bit weaker of an argument.
Yeah.
I do think there's smoke to the fire about if the Lakers just wound up where they were seated at 8 and go against the Thunder, there's much more of a chance of them advancing to the second round in a more compelling series.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick
Sure.
to your point with those stars not advancing, the NBA has a TV deal. And so that's a huge factor as well in terms of, if you heard the news, NBC is bidding a lot of money on those rights.
Yeah. Amazon
TNT,
Prime as well.
Yep, Amazon is in the mix. And if you're TNT, Warner Brothers Discovery, you take a look at the ratings and really, I mean, who we mentioned it, who's the face of this league? Is it Jokic, Embiid? They have a lot of great star players, but like no one's like the, I think, number one guy in terms of pulling in just that casual fan outside of what you mentioned with KD, Curry, and LeBron. So I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to watch in this playoffs as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword because you got to develop the legacies and talent of the younger generation. But you're right. It is a little bit potentially of bad timing as far as those broadcasting deals. Real quick note on that. I got to say I was relieved to see Charles Barkley has a clause in his contract that he can go to, like if TNT loses their rights, he can go to a company that picks up the rights.
He does. Ernie Johnson doesn't, though.
Yeah, it'd be a shame to break them up after all that history. And who knows if Charles wants to do it without Ernie. Yeah. I mean, it may be his opportunity to ride off into the sunset. So good point. I think we still have to be, as basketball fans, a little bit scared about that. Let's rapid fire these, Justin. For Cleveland versus Orlando, these next 2 series are series going as we expected they would. Cleveland at the time of this recording is up 3-2. I picked Cleveland in 7. I believe you had that as well, or maybe it was Cleveland in 6. Forgive me if I'm wrong. And basically I said just Donovan Mitchell and there's a little bit more talent and a little more experience on Cleveland that'll get them through. That seems to be the case. They're trading blows back and forth. Kudos to Orlando for being as interesting as you and I hoped that they would. Any thoughts on that series beyond that?
Yeah, not too much. As I said, kudos to again. There's a lot of new teams, in the mix with a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. Orlando's not the A seed; they have a pretty high seed within the playoffs, so good to see them hanging with Cleveland again. It's not over. I mean, even though I picked Cleveland, the Magic are in it, and I'm curious to see what happens. And again, there's a big question with Donovan Mitchell. So, I mean, if Cleveland does lose, I mean, I'm sure that's going to play a factor in his future as well. So.
Well, and allegedly he already wants out of there
There you go.
regardless. But
Yeah.
yeah, I got to be honest. I'm pulling for Orlando, but I still think Cleveland's gonna
Me too.
pull this off. We'll stay with our predictions. Clippers versus Dallas. Dallas is up 3-2. The Clippers made the decision to put up a banner before Game 5 that said something like sending Dallas to Galveston or something like that.
What?
Getting your ticket to Galveston in reference to Charles Barkley.
Oh,
And
man.
then Dallas beat them by 30 points in that Game 5.
Oh.
So clearly one of those bulletin board material mistakes, I think, if you look at it. Kawhi is in and out for the Clippers. Harden has had, oddly, kind of familiar to his last series with the Sixers last year. He's had some incredible performances, but can't do it every game. Had, I believe, a stinker in Game 5. So they're going back and forth. Hopefully you saw that Kyrie Irving behind the back highlight drive into the basket was incredible. That dude's still got the handles and skills. Dallas seems to be clicking pretty well. You and I predicted Dallas would win this series. I believe I said in 6. I think you had said the same thing.
Correct. Yeah.
And it does look like there's huge potential. It could play out that way. Dallas still seems to have enough health to carry them through. Winner of this series matches up with the Thunder, and that could be a very interesting series depending on how healthy these teams are. Justin, your thoughts either way? I mean, I guess this is your chance to dunk on the Clippers like we've been doing all year, even when they've been looking great.
Yeah. I mean, what can we say about the Clippers, right? I mean, the trade happens, they struggle, and then they're the toast of the town. Just with, they go. I think they went on a huge winning streak, and then where are we at now, right? So I'm not surprised. I mean, how many times we bashed the Clippers on the show since we relaunched in 2020? So I think with the Dallas Mavericks, they are pretty interesting. Again, this is going to be a true test. I mean, this is I think a great matchup for the Mavericks in terms of you're not facing a power team if they do advance against the Clippers of what Luka and Kyrie can really do. I mean, you're facing a young team compared to Luka and Kyrie. And Kyrie's an NBA champion that has a lot of experience. So I think for the Mavericks, again, it's a prime opportunity to see how much potential do the Mavericks truly have with this current roster constructed.
Got to say real quick before we move on that I feel for Coach Ty Lue,
Sure.
who I feel like anyone would agree can coach circles around Jason Kidd. Not trying to disrespect Jason Kidd. The Mavericks are playing hard and playing well, so credit to him, especially for their defensive effort. I don't know if that's one of his assistants that deserves the primary credit for that, but as the head coach, I think he gets credit for that too. But man, Ty Lue's just got to be struggling watching this series play out the way it has. And again, just like in the regular season, not knowing if Kawhi is going to be there or not and how he's going to be even when he is there. Unfortunately, it's just the stamp that is going to be permanent on Kawhi Leonard's career, which is a bummer to see because it kind of feels like as a fan, you've been cheated out of seeing what could have been an even greater career. So, just kind of a bummer there. Let's go into, I labeled this one and I'll fully own it. Series we disagreed on, parentheses, but Justin got it right because I have to tip my cap to you. You were correct about both these series. Let's start with Indiana Pacers versus Milwaukee Bucks. Bucks were my pick to go to the finals. So I'm shaking a disappointed finger at the Bucks basically all season long, but especially now. And unfortunately, it's another injury story. Basically, I thought Giannis would be back by game 3 or so. We're approaching game 6, and I did see a report that Damian Lillard is going to try it out. He
Yeah,
has
he's playing now.
yeah, he has an Achilles issue. So you're hoping, of course, that nothing intensifies or worsens based on this. But this was kind of Damian Lillard's shot at a title this year is kind of how it was pitched, and it's gone horribly wrong so far. Pacers leading 3-2. Justin, you picked the Pacers, and I would bet that you're going to be correct at this point. Give us your thoughts on how this has played out and what went so right.
Yeah. So right now the game's going on as we speak. 89-78 Pacers. I
Damn.
would say the Pacers hang on, but I think with the Bucks, even though I picked the Pacers, I like a lot of their team. I think what caused a lot of concern is just like you said, Matt, the injuries, right? And really Doc Rivers coaching. I mean, we talked to an insider earlier this year about the reservations about Doc Rivers, coaching this team when the Bucks, it wasn't in dire straits. They made a coaching change, and yet I think here we are in the situation now. Granted, I think Doc Rivers will probably get a pass if they are to lose, just due to the injuries to Giannis and Damian Lillard. But at the same time, I think this is a pretty lackluster performance. Even though there's been really some great performances by Chris Middleton, I think he's been awesome. Bobby Portis, even though he got ejected, I think he's been showing some bright spots. But if the pace, I just like the paces where they're constructed in. With Pascal Siakam being the missing piece, as we discussed on Kings of Sport, I think the Pacers have a really great nucleus here to really make some noise as one of the top teams in the East. So I think they hang on, looking that way. They're home always. Indiana's great basketball town. Great basketball state, and just Indianapolis. Their home court's rocking right now, so I think they do hang on and beat the Bucks.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe in future years the Pacers can make some more noise. I think if they're matching up against the Knicks next round, I think they're going to get smacked pretty hard based on what we've seen. But we'll see how that plays out. Maybe Halliburton and Siakam show us something even beyond this series. Speaking of the Knicks, the 2 seed versus the 7 seed 76ers. Again, this is one where Justin got it right. I believe you had Knicks in 6. Maybe it was Knicks in 7. Either way, you had the Knicks, and I had Sixers in 6, I think. Yeah, you had Knicks in 7. That's right. Well, what can I say? I will be reluctant to ever have faith in Joel Embiid again. Unfortunately, again, some of the story in this series is injury related. He's not all the way back to 100%. Maxey, if you caught their game 5 where the Sixers held on to win it, he scored 7 points in the last 28.2 seconds of the game. I think even shorter than that. I think it was last 20 seconds, and there were still 8 seconds left on the clock when he hit that last shot. Controversial because there was a travel on the 4-point play that he made, but it wasn't caught until afterwards in the 2-minute report. So a lot of controversy around that, a lot of angry celebrities in New York. You love to see that and the fire and the passion of these games. Justin, you got this right. So again, I'll defer to you. What happened? How have the Knicks been so successful?
Yeah, I think Jalen Brunson, even though he had such a brutal turnover in overtime, I think I am nervous about this game 6 because the way it just played out in overtime, I wonder just mentally how they're going to withstand such a brutal loss like that. I am curious. Another thing, storyline in the series is, Philly is supposed to be a sports town, right? Like I bash Denver. I live in Denver in terms of their fans, in terms of hearing opposing fans. But where there's certain places still within the NBA, you would expect to have a clear home court advantage. The Knicks, I would say Golden State, and there's some other teams, but I was shocked, just amazed to hear. And I understand as I keep bringing it up, but Kings of Sport, Chris from LA, he's from his tagline is Chris from LA. He lived, I believe, in Philly. He said it's 2 hours from Philly to New York. I understand that, but this is supposed to be Philadelphia, one of the best sports towns in America, and yet Knicks fans are making way more noise. And a great thing to come out of this is I think the Philly fans. They ownership has donated 2,500 tickets to local Philly organizations
Saw
for
that.
tonight's game. So I think that's
First
really cool.
responders.
Yeah,
Mhm.
first response. That's awesome. But at the same time, I find it curious. I don't know if you saw it, Matt, but our former guest of the show, CP the franchise, was like courtside at the game. So it was just like, what are we doing? But
Shout
I
out.
mean, yeah, like I mean, this a clear, not even home court advantage for the 76ers. So I think that's a huge concern. Um, I have my reservations. I think Tyrese Maxey's been phenomenal. I think there's been a lot of discussion in terms of if he's going to be the face of the league. I think that's a little that's a little premature. I think if Anthony Edwards, I think if that's premature, then definitely Tyrese Maxey is. And I think he's been great. And really, he's been the only person really keeping him in this series, along with Batum as well. But I think you're right about Embiid. That's why I didn't pick him. He's not all the way right. Like he's
Yeah.
just gutting it out there. But I am worried once whoever they get bounced or they advance. It was MRI. What's going to happen with him because he does not look 100%. Um, but yeah, I think the momentum's with the Knicks, and I kind of disagree with you if they make it to the next round. Just like taking a look at the potential matchup against the Pacers. I like the Pacers in that series actually.
Mm,
I really do. I just think the Knicks they doesn't make a ton of like mental mistakes.
mm.
And I think especially from Jalen Brunson, who I think I love, but sometimes I just don't know. The turnovers they made in that game 5 really made me nervous in terms of them um advancing a long ways in this playoffs. But they get the magic at Madison Square Garden, the fans, they got the momentum. But yeah, it is worrisome if they lose game 6. How are they going to be mentally in a game 7 scenario? Even though I picked the Knicks, even though I made the pick, I am nervous to say the least. So we'll see.
Yeah, I got to give kudos to the Knicks. I really am a fan of try hard teams, which is
Yeah,
why I almost wanted to pick Orlando over Cleveland. And I definitely thought the Randall injury was going to play
me too.
more of a factor than it did.
Yeah,
And the Knicks have been able to rise above that. And kudos to them. Kudos to Coach Tibbs for the job that he's done so far. And I do think the Knicks are going to advance here. You never know. I mean, sometimes weird things like that Maxey ending can cause momentum that shifts series. But this Sixers team in the past hasn't been one that's really like been super mentally tough and gutted things out, unfortunately. So I don't think that this year as the 7th seed and with Embiid pretty banged up still, I don't think this is the year that happens.
yeah,
But we'll see. Maybe we'll come back on next week and we'll be very shocked and have the 76ers in the second round somewhere. Justin, why don't we end with this? Because I know we've been going a while and we want to keep this under an hour. Give me your pick, and I'm happy to go first if you need to think about it. But let's go ahead since we do have T-Wolves and Nuggets set. Let's give our predictions for that, and we can talk more about the second round next week. Give
yeah.
me your pick in terms of who's winning. You said Nuggets. I will let you know my thoughts on that. Do you have a game number in mind that you see the Nuggets winning in that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I got Nuggets in 6, I would say. I think the experience factor in this Jokic and Jamal Murray, everything's clicking. So I got him in 6, but I can see it going 7.
Awesome. I think a thing that people are starting to talk about that I think makes a lot of sense is Gobert has not been able to contain Jokic or even seemingly slow him down all that much like you would expect. He might be able to give him more problems. We'll see what happens this year at this go around, but that's one of the primary reasons. And I do think when you look at the instant offense that Jokic always is able to generate. And I don't think they're going to have a surefire answer for the Murray Jokic pick and roll that is so deadly. So I'm with you. I have the Nuggets winning this series. I'll go ahead and give a tip of the cap to the T-Wolves because they did take it, I believe, to 5 last season. And it was one of those series that was more competitive than it looked. So I'll go ahead and say with the growth of Anthony Edwards, I'll say Nuggets in 7, but I do think the Nuggets convincingly win this series in spite of it going maybe longer than last year. We got to get out of here and wrap it up, call it a day. Always a pleasure chatting and analyzing the league with you, Justin, and making these reactions and predictions. You guys, let us know your thoughts in the comments as these second round matches start to materialize. We'd love to hear who you've got. We'd love to hear, what your thoughts are on the era changing and kind of Jokic making his stamp. Is Anthony Edwards the next American face of the league anyway? What are your thoughts on all the topics that we covered today? Let us know in the comments. As always, appreciate you tuning in and supporting the show. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Peace out.
See you later.